It's fair to say runaway trains are rare, but whenever they do occur, it's almost impossible to stop them, and it often leads to disaster. And it's also a bad thing when there's someone stuck aboard it. And this has happened many times in the past before. In one case in particular, battled away back in 1962 on the New York Central Railroad, that exact thing happened, and it almost took someone's life. It was October 26th, 1962. Workman Joseph Jarris was working on a locomotive that was in a rail yard. The locomotive in question was the second unit of a four-engine Lasha, each locomotive being a New York Central GP20 locomotive. Joseph was busy refueling the sandboxes in the locomotives and overall making sure that the engines were running properly. Meanwhile, engineer Robert Cox was in the cab of the lead locomotive, who was moving all four of the engines onto another track in order to be refueled, and while it does get refueled, they will also have a routine inspection just to see if anything is wrong with the locomotives. Joseph, meanwhile, was still in the second unit refueling the sandbox. All is going well, but then something happens to the engineer inside of the lead unit.
Train! What in hell's he doing out there? He looks sick! Damn! Damn! Ow!
And just like that, the locomotives leave the yard without its engineer. Eventually, the dispatchers learned about the runaway, and so, since it was just four locomotives, their idea was to simply derail it. As it was going at a very high speed, it would definitely do some damage if they let it keep going. So they set a switch to a siding and just simply waited for the runaway train to go over it and derail onto the siding. But then they hear something that sends chills up their backs. Joseph Jarris was still inside of the second unit, even after the engineer had been incapacitated. He started blowing the horn to tell people that he was on the train, and this ended up working as the dispatchers immediately set the points back to the original set. They set it back just mere seconds before the runaway train passed over it. So that was a close call. But then the dispatchers remembered an old trestle bridge It was so old that there was a speed restriction of that bridge. If any train went over that speed restriction, the bridge would most likely collapse. The restriction for the bridge was 50 miles per hour. This train was going at speeds of 92 miles per hour. There would be no chance that this speeding out of control train would make it over that bridge. Jarvis, knowing about the danger ahead, in an last-stage effort, he went to the front of the second engine, reached down next to the coupler, and disconnected the electric cables between the first engine and the second engine, and the 3 trailing engines shut down as a result, and the runaway train slowed down to 80 miles per hour from 92 miles per hour. And as a result of this, and coupled with an extreme amount of luck, the train was able to get over the bridge without it collapsing. Jarvis then walked back into the second engine and crouched down, bracing for an inevitable impact that was later to come. Then came their next plan of action. 2 other locomotives were primed and ready ahead of the runaway train. The plan was for after the runaway had passed, these 2 chasing units would chase it down, hook up, and then brake. After the runaway had passed, the points were set, and the chasing units chased after the runaway. However, they had to abort the mission after it was realized that the 2 chasing units couldn't catch up to the runaway, so they ended up having to stop their locomotives. But then the dispatchers remembered something that made them panic. A chemical plant, and the runaway was headed straight for it at 80 miles per hour. So they had no choice to derail this train while there was someone aboard. Jarvis eventually found the courage to hop the gap between the second and the first locomotive, and then he hopped into the cab of the first unit and shut down the engine, and the train finally came to a halt. When a switcher engine came to tow the locomotives away, they found Joseph Jarvis standing right next to the now stopped locomotives. He was shaken up, but alive. It was eventually discovered that Robert Cox, the engineer, had suffered a heart attack, and while trying to stop the train, he had set the throttle to maximum, notch 8, and he had set the brakes to full, which meant that the locomotives weren't stopping. They were just going faster, and the brakes weren't doing anything other than getting burnt up. And they were completely burned off as soon as they were stopped. And the engineer fell off the train and unfortunately passed away. This particular incident inspired the 1985 movie Runaway Train. I highly recommend that you watch it. Although, fair warning, it is rated R for a reason. But if you're willing to, then go watch it. It's a fun ride. In fact, I've used some clips from that movie for this video. Just a little fun fact. Now, before I wrap this video up, I would just like to say thank you for all your support. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers, and I cannot thank you guys enough. As soon as we hit 1K subscribers, I will be making or releasing that new Unstoppable remastered version of Unstoppable. So, yeah, thank you guys so much. And I honestly believe that I could not get as far as I did this quickly. But I did. It was just a miracle. And I cannot thank you guys enough. So I will see you guys next time.